Hey, so for this week's Bible study, we are in James chapter 4, verse 13 through 17. And this is what it says. Now listen, you who say, today or tomorrow, we will go to this city or that city, we'll spend a year there, we'll carry on business, and we'll make money. Why, you do not even know what will happen tomorrow. What is your life? You are a mist that appears for a little while and then vanishes. Instead, you ought to say, if it is the Lord's will, we will live and do this or that. As it is, you boast in your arrogant schemes. All such boasting is evil. If anyone then knows the good that they ought to do and doesn't do it, it is sin for them. So we're talking a little bit about boasting. Boasting is basically excessive, proud talk or self-satisfied talk about your achievements, your possessions, your abilities, whatever it might be. Boasting, right? So I want you to think of someone that you know who is struggling with boasting or is very boastful. Now, if you're not thinking about yourself, then you're obviously very proud and self-satisfied. So you're boasting about not being boastful. So when I was younger, I had a dirt bike. It was a KX 125, and we were having a bonfire. I was having a bunch of friends over, and of course, I was talking about the dirt bike and how I could, hit this jump and all this kind of stuff. And so I went out and I got the bike started up. And we had this mound of dirt in our pasture area, and we had been dumping leaves on it all fall. And so I knew that I'd hit that mound of dirt before and caught some air, and so I was going to show off and hit that mound of dirt again. But what I didn't know is that all of the leaves that we had stacked up on top of it hadn't gotten compacted. So when I went into it, I went into the leaves and I couldn't see where the mound of dirt was. And so as soon as the bike went into the leaves, it just kind of went in and I couldn't see the mound of dirt. And so it hit it and it popped up. Basically, my body shot off the bike and my toes came up and hit the handlebars. And the bike, the whole thing, we all just went down in a big old heap. And I totally wrecked the bike. I sprained both my wrists. I got all cut and scraped up and all this stuff. And trashed the bike, like totally wrecked the bike. It was stupid. I was being boastful and proud, and it was stupid. Verse 14, it says, why, you don't even know what will happen tomorrow or even in the next minute, right? So we think that we are God. We think that we're great, but in reality, we're not. We're not in control. I've thought, I'm a great skateboarder, I'm a talented skateboarder, and then somebody will come along and do a trick that's better than what I can do. There's always someone that can do it just a little bit better. Even think about those, with the Olympics, who they're setting a record. That record is very likely to be broken at the next Olympic Games, right? Think about the best of the best even, like Bill Gates, right? Richest man in the world. Well, actually, he's not anymore. Jeff Bezos, I think, surpassed him. Right? So somebody will always beat the record. They'll make more money than you. Now, as kind of a side note, I don't want to discourage you. This doesn't mean that we don't try or that you're not valuable as a person. God has a plan and a purpose for your life. You are valuable. You are loved, right? Now, that plan and that purpose that God has for your life might not be to be the greatest or the richest, right? It is about living out God's will and God's calling for your life. So, verse 15, it says, instead, you ought to say, if it is the Lord's will, we will live and do this or that. So, we talked about this a little bit last week. We talked about submitting yourself to God and humbling yourself. This is a continuation of that, right? Instead, if it is the Lord's will, we live and do this or that. So instead of, committing and boasting about what our will is and what our plans are, instead we boast about the Lord and we obey His will. We submit ourselves and humble ourselves to His plan and His will for our life. So what if God's will for your life was to sell everything that you had, give it to the poor, and then live homeless and serve and minister to that homeless community? Would you submit and humble yourself and do that? Well, what if God's will for your life was to be single your whole life, to never date, to never get married? Would you do that? What if God's will for your life was to serve others, to care for other people, to never do anything unkind or wrong to anyone else, and then to die in the place of a criminal? Would you submit to God and do that? Would you give your life to do that? That's what Jesus did for you. He actually did all three of those things. He did all of that for us. Verse 16 says, "As it is, you boast in your arrogant schemes. All such boasting is evil. If anyone then knows the good they ought to do and doesn't do it, it is sin for them." So this is the challenge for us, right? The challenge is to submit to God's will for your life. What is God's will? Is God's will for your life to become the richest or the greatest or the best, right? We all hope so, of course, but maybe it's not. What is God's will for your life? I want you to spend some time asking God. Pray. Ask God, what is your will for my life? Read God's Word. God's Word, the Bible, it has it all in there. Read God's Word. Do what it says. It says right here in verse 17, "If anyone then knows the good that they ought to do and doesn't do it, it is sin for them." So do good. That's God's will for your life. Do good. Don't boast in your will. Submit to God's will for your life.